Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I start another piece for my Beatrix Potter study series. And if you missed the first two, I actually did an inking of Peter Rabbit, and then the second video was the watercolor of that. And I'm sure if you're a Beatrix Potter fan and you know her through Peter Rabbit, you're probably looking at this now going, that can't be Beatrix Potter. Oh, but it is. I'm also going to link down below for you the site that I got my reference photo for this piece, and it is from the Victoria and Albert Museum website. And if you check that website out, you will discover, as I did, not only did Miss Potter do those cute little animals that we have come to know and love in her children's art, but she also did insects, and she did plants, and she did some fungi. She studied fungi and apparently was very knowledgeable in these areas. Not only did she have those types of things, but she also had several art style types. So, which would make sense if you are doing children's art. It's going to look different than something you're going to be doing for a scientific magazine or publication. So what we're looking at now, this was a study of onions that she had done, and I didn't do the whole piece. Like I said, I will link that down below, and you can search around and you will find this piece in there. But I only did 3 of them. She had 3 separate ones at the top, but I thought this made for a good composition. What I did discover at looking through her work was that she didn't just use black ink, she also used brown. Unfortunately, I didn't have any brown ink, but I'm going to get some brown because she used both on this piece. She used black for the dark areas where there were heavy shadows on the onions themselves, and then the tops of the onions, she used the brown ink. So we're going to completely fill this in with the ink, and then we're going to get started with the watercolor, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about how her style changes from Peter Rabbit to her more realistic artwork. Now that we have it completely inked in, we're going to start with the watercolor. And I should mention that the pen I used for that was my Fude de Mannen pen. And I have a video on that pen as well, and I'll link it down below. So we're going to have tea with Miss Potter today. And by that I mean I am going to be using some aged Earl Grey. It does not matter what kind of tea you use as long as it is a black tea. I have my Windsor&Newton set. And then I also have a 3/4 inch flat brush there that I'm going to use to get a good wash on here with the tea. And the reason I'm using tea, you will notice around the outside edge, I have a pencil line that forms a rectangle and gives me a good white border, and I'm staying inside of that to do the tea wash. And the tea wash is going to give me a good base wash on there. It's going to make it look aged. And if you look on the Victoria and Albert website and you see the picture that I used for this piece, then you will notice that in the center where the onions are, it looks like this. It is a very creamy color. It looks aged. And then around the outside, there's a white border. So I wanted to emulate that on here, and I decided that I would use tea. Now, I have painted with coffee before with my students. We've painted with tea. Personally, I like the smell of coffee better than tea, but Earl Grey, if I'm painting with tea, I'll paint with Earl Grey because it smells really good. But this is just what we happen to have at home, and I decided the only other type of tea we had was loose leaf tea, and I'm just not going to mess with that. So I just got my tea bag and just dipped it in. I did 3 coats of this in order to get the dark that I needed for the background. And if you run over your pencil lines, you're going to see in the next few frames, in a few minutes, I'm going to be erasing those pencil lines. I was trying to be very careful not to run over the pencil lines, but much like watercolor, if you run over your pencil lines with it, you're not going to be able to erase the pencil lines. So there are a few of my lines that are left, but that's okay because this is kind of a practice. This wasn't a masterpiece. This is a learning piece. So that's okay. I did let it dry between each of the layers of tea, and I could have done another layer had I wanted to, but I decided just to do 3 layers. I thought 3 was enough. And it is sometimes difficult, especially I work in front of a window, and the way the light shines on the paper, sometimes it was difficult to see if I had actually covered the entire thing with the tea, but we got a good coat. So now I'm going to go around the edge and try to get rid of that border. And then we're going to start with the watercolor. And over on the palette, I will have the colors that I'm using from that Windsor&Newton set. So we're starting with a little burnt umber, and I'm going to lay all the colors out here to begin with, and then we're going to get started painting. And you'll notice that I'm putting some just water down, and then I'll put the color on top. That helps me to not waste any paint. So I have my water down, I get a little bit of paint and put it over there, and it saves a lot of time, and it does not waste any of the product. So then we have some Windsor blue, and I'm going to put a little yellow ochre with that because I didn't want exactly Windsor blue. I wanted something that was more of a teal. Now I just need to spot a cadmium for yellow, and yes, that is a shocking color, but because of the tea in the background, it really mutes it on here. And this is one thing that I didn't do with the Peter Rabbit piece. I did put some small areas of washes for the wall and for the door and for the rabbit, but I did not do a huge wash of the whole piece like this. And when you do a huge wash, it really does affect the colors that you're putting on top. And whether Miss Potter put down an entire wash as I did on this, I'm not certain. But one thing she did do that was different than the Peter Rabbit piece is, to me, it appeared as if she did little wash areas like I'm doing now, doing one onion at a time, and then dropped in colors in certain areas and allowed those to kind of blend together. Once those are dry, and this is what I'm going to do on mine, it looked as if she came back with that dry brushing technique that I found her using with the Peter Rabbit. So those are some things to be looking for as we move along here. I'm going to be quiet for now. I'll let you watch me paint, and I'm going to hop back on in a second and talk a little bit more about some stuff I discovered. I believe the area I'm working on right now is a good example of something I noticed with Miss Potter's work. You can see how I put that blue at the bottom of that onion, and I put it in areas where there are no lines drawn. The paint actually creates the image for us and doesn't rely on the lines. I noticed that in her lining with Peter Rabbit, and she did that with this also. She allowed a heavy weighted line where there's going to be shadow. She even filled it in. You can see where I have filled in areas with the ink. She came back over those with paint later, but she had the heavy areas like that, but then she would have broken lines when she was drawing. There is something just charming about these older illustrations like this, and I think that's something I really like about them. Again, she used, I'm sure, a dip pen. I used a fountain pen. And you get these lines that are thick and thin, and these weighted lines and these thin lines, but she also used broken lines, which took me back to my college days. And one of my drawing teachers used to say, and I always thought this sounded very artsy, he would say, never close up your lines in a piece. Allow your viewer the freedom to move through the entire piece. And I used to teach that to my students. Don't close up your lines. Don't create a tight drawing. Allow there to be some open spaces. Allow your color to fill in and create that line that you have not drawn. And that is what Beatrix Potter does in this piece, and she does it so well. We are coming to the end of our first wash on this. And again, all of this wash has been wet on wet technique, just dropping in the colors. I'm not using a lot of water on my brush because I'm getting ready for this step. And we're going to be putting some more colors on. And this is where I'm going to start to use the rest of those colors, except for black, over in my palette. And this has dried for probably about 24 hours. I had some things I had to do, couldn't finish it the same day. So I came back the next morning and I finished it up. And I'm starting with a dry brush technique. So you'll see me occasionally, I'll start painting and then my brush will disappear to the side, and that's because I realize I have too much water in the bristles. These brushes are by Royal and Langnickel, and they're wonderful for watercolor, the kind of technique I do that holds a lot of water. But for her technique, I really don't need as much water. So again, I just went to the side and tapped my brush, didn't want as much water in there. So I'm going to be coming back with this quote, I'm using air quotes, dry brush technique, and I'm going to go back and forth and start adding these layers. So you'll see me skip around. I don't want to add a layer too quickly, and I did this all in one take. What you're seeing right now took me about 20 minutes, and this was in between talking to my family and things that we were going on in the background. That's why I have to voice over everything. But I skipped around on it, and it took about 20 minutes to do the whole thing. So this is hot press paper, and it does allow me to move things around a little bit more than what a cold press paper would. And I do have a few little areas. I can get a little bit of water on my brush and correct those if you need to do that. But I found just taking my brush and wiping it on my little microfiber cloth towel and coming back in, I could clean up edges without even having to get extra water on. So I'm going to be quiet, let you watch me work, and just know that that's why I'm moving around. I'm allowing some areas to dry, so I'm not adding another color on top until it gets an opportunity to dry, because I don't want to create that ballooning when you add wet watercolor on top of wet watercolor. are about to see me pick up some sap green, and there are many artists that will tell you never just use sap green, and they despise sap green. I personally am a sap green advocate because you can take that sap green and add it on top of other colors. Some people call it layering and some people call it glazing. I call it layering. So if you hear those terms, just know we're talking about the same thing. Now I've come in and I'm adding some of that Windsor lemon. And if you've ever looked at a Windsor&Newton palette, you'll know that, and you can see on there, it looks radioactive. It's so yellow, but it's not as bright as what it can be if you were to use that straight on white paper, because we do have those colors underneath. And that, I do have some videos out there and I can link those down below as well. I'll try to remember to do that. But if I forget, just go back and take a look. I do have some videos that show my technique of how you can layer colors. And it's sort of like mixing colors right on the paper as you go. As you can see, I have mixed up a super dark color in the upper right hand corner of my palette. And I'm going to be using that in the areas where I have those heavy ink lines, where I have allowed the lines to not just be a weighted line, but I've come back and I have filled them in with ink, just as what it appeared to me that Miss Potter had done on her piece. And these areas for me, when I was looking at how she applied her paint and studying her pieces, it was hard to tell. Did she just use ink or did she use ink and paint? And I finally decided that I think she used ink and paint. So that's what I wanted to do on this piece, and I did. And once the piece dried and I looked at it, I thought, you know, I really do think that's what she did. I think she put the ink down and then she came back and she put the dark color on top. So in some of these, you know, I am putting the colors over on the palette that I'm laying in. If I'm not telling you the color I'm laying in on the palette, it's because I'm using the same colors. I'm just making it a little bit darker. So I have a little bit more of the Payne's Gray up there, and that's just to make that a bit darker and really knock home the shadow in that area. You know, I often say in my videos, I have broken the rules once again in art. If there are rules to be broken, you may have noticed I didn't necessarily lay down all the light colors and then add all the dark colors. I've laid down some dark colors and then I've come back and put yellow on top of them. It kind of depends what effect you're needing to create. And as I look at this piece, and again, I'm not putting Miss Potter's piece on here. I don't own the rights to that piece, and I'm just using it as a study piece here. So if you want to find it, and you'll be able to find it, the link below, you can compare the two pieces, and you will see that my colors are a bit darker than hers. Now that could be age. It's also because, you know, her piece is older and I'm not using the same paints that she used. I'm having to try to guess and make it as close as I can. If I had it to do over again, I think I would make some of my areas a little lighter, but I really, really enjoyed doing this. And I feel like I learned so much just by looking at her work and trying to reproduce what she did. But let me know in the comments, would you like to see me do another one of her children's book illustrations in the next one, like a Peter Rabbit? Or would you like to see me do one of her realistic pieces? She also has some that she does not use the ink lines on, so I could do something like that. Let me know down below. But thank you so much for being here. You know, I always appreciate it when you're here and when you give me suggestions and tips. I'm always happy to hear from you. I do hope you'll join me for my upcoming videos on this series. And until then, I will see you in the next one.